Constantine's immediate impact on Christianity. As soon as its inception, Christianity had endured harsh punishment. From the stoning of Stephen to becoming the embodiment of national reproach. At the time of Emperor Nero, Christianity had fast developed an identity of national disrepute. As the faith was forged through the persecution of the soldering iron of Rome, even the 1st and 2nd centuries of Christianity, the faithful were met with prejudice, discrimination, and even false accusations of being a threat to national security as terrorists. Christians were crucified in their thousands. For instance, it was Emperor Nero himself who had set fire to Rome with the intentions of publicly pinning the crime on the followers of Christ. This was done in an effect to galvanize the nation against them. As it was once said, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt of burning of Rome on the Christians, and then he inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations called the Christians. What followed were unspeakable horrors. One such horror was Christians being fed to hungry lions. However, the mother of all persecutions climaxed in the 3rd century under the reign of Emperor Diocletian. It was the last and most severe that the Christians would experience in the Roman Empire. In an effort to unify the nation and revitalize traditional practices of giving glory to the Roman gods, Emperor Diocletian, Constantinus, Galerius, Maximum issued edicts that demanded the Christians to participate in universal sacrifices to their pagan gods on their pagan altars. They were forced, under the death decree, to bow down to these pagan idols. Yet, although the intensity of persecution varied across the empire, it would go down as one of the bloodiest stages of Christian pilgrimage. Some 20,000 deaths at the hand of Diocletian as Christians became public enemy number one on an empire-wide scale. It was the historian and theologian Thomas Fuller who said, "The hour is darkest just before dawn." And it was in these darkest hours that Christian history that finally there was hope, coming at the end of a long, arduous tunnel that engulfed the movement of Christ. The first rays of light appeared after almost 300 years of persecution. It was in these times that Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, the edict that would cease Christian persecution indefinitely. This gesture was of major significance to the Christians, as you could well imagine. There were happy Christians everywhere. Happy, happy, joy, joy. In the 4th century, 313 AD, after issuing the Edict of Milan, Constantine not only ordered that the persecution of Christians cease, but that all confiscated property, buildings, land, to be restored in full to individual Christians as well as the corporate body. The iron hand that once was against them had now extended itself forth as the bearer of the Church's recognition of legitimacy and of integrity. So from now on, the hand of friendship was extended to all Christians. The Church, at the precise moment of the conversion of Emperor Constantine, had been ushered to the door of a new era of Christianity. It seemed as though the dark tunnel of crucifixion, obscurity and gruesome tortures and hard trials were all finally behind them. Constantine would now become a convert to Christianity. As a bright new day shone before their very eyes, the emperor had now espoused the faith, and this had been officially stamped by the seal of Rome. Between what was once a steady trickle to the raging flood of open gates, all were welcome to become Christians. With the end of persecution and Constantine as its new representative, Christianity now stood on the shores of a new world. The state was converted. Constantine was a Christian. The church went from obscurity to dominance as its status catapulted to preeminence, espousing the Emperor of Rome as its latest convert. Through the conversion of Constantine, this once isolated and persecuted sect now became the official religion of the Roman Empire. The new religion was no longer a novelty, no longer an alien or little-known sect. Backed by Constantine himself, it became what would become the greatest and biggest change of face that the church would ever experience. A supreme makeover of the ages, you would say, whose PR manager was the emperor himself. A visible sign of this makeover was the construction and erecting of beautiful and elaborate church buildings, symbolizing a new dawn of the Christian era, whose new edifices would cast the imposing shadows over the dwelling pagan temples. The baton of Rome had been in the hands of Juniper and the pagan gods for centuries. Now, a new runner would take the stage in the religious world. Determined to give Christianity a new public face, not unaware of the tension that extended within the members of the Senate and the tension in the great families of those who still venerated the ancient gods, Constantine began in the construction of a church in Rome. In breaking with ancient tradition, Constantine erected monuments to the one true God, Yahweh. And, as time would pass, it would not be long until stately churches and cathedrals would sit in the central public squares of most cities of Rome. However, what would this new dawn of Christianity spell for the birth child of Christ, his church? Thus, in this new dawn, in his convictions, Constantine had embraced the faith as his own and had adorned it with aesthetic beauty and a prestige status. Some opinions vary. Some, such as Eusebius, the bishop of Caesarea, glorified it as the Christianization of the world, albeit Constantine's Christian empire as the fulfillment of the millennial kingdom. 1,000 years of peace on earth is what they believed. 1,000 years of peace and the reign of Christ. In an elaborate 4-book eulogy known as The Life of Constantine, Eusebius went so far as to carve out forever his hero as the place as a representative of God on earth. And what better city than in Rome? Thus, the empire seemed to carry the providential task of carrying the cross of Christ to the vast reaches of the kingdom. With Constantine at the helm, the conversion of the world seemed near. However, there were others that didn't see things quite so positively, and they condemned Constantine's conversion as the death blow to true Christianity. And they lamented its apparent success as the beginning of an influx of corruption, greed, and worldly contamination. Thus, as the famed historian and moralist John Acton once said, "Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." In fact, one historian observed that the bishops would ride in carriages, dressed splendidly, and surpass even kings in their glamour. Christian ministers were invited into the most intimate chambers of state politics. It had been recorded that at the Council of Nicaea, 200 bishops travelled at the emperor's expense, with all expenses paid, and they were treated fabulously for the entire proceedings of the council. It was sometimes hard to distinguish the Christian leaders from the civic and political figures as they dined at their lavish tables. And they were waited on hand and foot and treated as if they were visiting kings. Now, the impact of Constantine's conversion to the Christian church can be broadly seen in twofold. One, Constantine's glorification of the church gave it tremendous survival capabilities of over 300 years of severe persecution. This could have been the main reason why they survived. Number 2, the result was also a decline of Christian standard, moralism, holiness and purity, and its gluttony for power, wealth and prestige in the opportune moment of its glorification. Once Christians had laid down their lives for the faith by the hand of the world, now they laid down the church to secure the prize of state and church together. Politics and religion make bad bedfellows. While most saw this story as a conversion of the emperor to the church, some have also understood this as a conversion of the church itself to Rome. For centuries, Roman politics has been intrinsically connected to the Roman religion. For Rome, public policy and religion were intimately connected. Historian Harold Drake once said that Constantine was looking not only for a God in whom to believe, but a policy that he could adopt. Thus, the conversion of Constantine and Rome must also be understood as a birthing of a new political as well as religious program. Thus, the question is then, how did the intrinsically political, religio nature of Rome impact the Christian church when Christianity was now its official religion? Well, it was the Council of Nicaea, 325 AD, had a big impact on the church. Arius, the Bishop of Alexandria, caused the church to erupt into two heavily competing fractions over the nature of Christ. What would become known as the Arian heresy. It taught that Jesus was of a lower nature and origin of his Father, or as the popular idiom was coined, there was a time when he was not. A nervous emperor grew increasingly persuaded that it was his just duty to involve himself in the dispute. As this theological warfare continued to divide the church, his involvement was not merely for the sake of the church, but for the sake of a united empire. It was in this conviction that Constantine, the emperor of the state, called the famous Council of Nicaea to resolve the issue. Constantine decided to step in as the adjudicator of the matter. As the meeting convened, all participants of some 200 bishops awaited the arrival of the emperor. He would make it the emperor's prerogative to intervene in state affairs. Was the church life now becoming a matter of the state? As the church life became to be less of a safe haven from worldly affairs and more an instrument of political policy, the gulf that separated the church from the state would be brought closer together as the ambassadors of the church would become players in state affairs. The story of Theodosius is fitting. Theodosius, Roman emperor of the late 4th century, had jailed a champion charioteer for practicing homosexuality, which sparked a massacre of 7,000 rebelling peasants who wanted their hero released. Ambrose, who was the Bishop of Milan, pressed the emperor to confess his crime and to repent from this sin. And in a striking display of religious authority, Ambrose refused the emperor communion until he confessed his sin and repented. However, after the emperor's stubbornness wore thin, he presented himself in front of a large congregation, and in a token of submission, he removed his splendid robes and asked for the pardoning of his sins. Wow! At last, the bishop gave the emperor communion. The irony in ironies, though, the once strong arm of Rome, who once shed the blood of Christians, had now shown an awesome display of submission before the church, and that this church was once who they triumphed over. Ambrose, in humbling an emperor, had set magnificent precedent, the threat of excommunication. That would prove so effective in the oncoming centuries the church would use. In conclusion, Constantine had effectively turned the once persecuted sect into a Christian empire of Rome. He had lavishly adorned it with riches, wealth and esteem, while uplifting its bishops to the most prestigious position, of which mass corruption soon followed. Constantine had also set the precedent for the collaboration of church and state, through his own involvement through ecclesiastical affairs, while integrating ecclesiastical leaders into the political arena. The church became an empire.